Okay, so this is me. I could not find my social media handler the same on all the social media, so it's different on all of them. I'm a Ruby developer since 2007. And today, my purpose is to cover a couple of topics. First, I'm going to talk a bit about why adopt new features. And then I will show you some code samples with these features that are in Ruby since at least Ruby 2.7, some of them, since then they were added. These are not, let's say, maybe the most newest or maybe the most creative, maybe for you, but I chose them with some, because I wanted, one, to pick something that I think can change the code shape, so how the code looks like when we are writing it. I also choose them because I needed to choose just some of them to present them in 30 minutes. And I also choose them because usually, at least what I see when I curate the newsletter, when people are sharing code samples with these ones, either over social media or Reddit or in some other places, there are a lot of comments and a lot of debates about them. And my purpose here is to show you some code samples and maybe inspire you to take a look at them. I'm not going to say this is good and this is bad, but more so like, hey, here it is how it can look if you want to give it a try. And lower the feeling of unfamiliarity of them, because maybe they seem strange when we look at them. And also because inspired by the morning, yeah, we maybe want to play with some strange ideas about how the code might look like. And one of the hidden reasons is that sometimes when we read a pull request when we debate a piece of code, we might confuse, I think, readability and understandability with being familiar. And I would like to make them a bit more familiar, so maybe we can judge them based on their own merits and not because we find them very strange and we did not so too much, maybe. So I was a silent consumer, let's say, of Ruby goodies since 2007, but only in the recent years I decided that I want to get involved. Now, I'm not a Ruby committer. I'm a developer that uses Ruby, and I asked myself, what can I do to contribute to the community? And one of the things that I was interested in it was how can I help grow the Ruby community? And I think I'm trying with my newsletter to publish it free, and maybe there are other people than only us that knows Ruby that looks at a piece of code and maybe they say, hey, what is this strange language? Let's give it a try, let's say. But the second, let's say, a second objective or topic for me will be how can I keep Ruby relevant for 30 years or more? Because I plan to use Ruby for at least 30 years more. And here again, I'm not a core committer, so my question for myself was, and I invite you also to think this, like how can I do this from my role as a developer if you are not a committer. So I started running Ruby coming from, I was writing Python back then and some PHP on the side, and I was trying to build UIs with these two that maybe very few people know, Scriptaculos and Prototype.js, which I think they were created by Rubyist, if I'm not mistaken. And I learned in faculty Java and C, and when I saw Ruby, it felt strange and almost illegal to write that kind of code. You know, like it should not be possible. They should not allow you to make this. But for me, I love Ruby, and I felt that Ruby is creativity and freedom for me. And it's creativity because we are talking in this community more than I found in others maybe, but I don't know others too much, so I'm just talking about ourselves. We talk about beautiful code. And beauty in a kind of embedded AI vector, beautiful is very close to art and is very close to creativity in my mind map. And it's freedom because, also Dave mentioned in the morning, I feel like Ruby fits the way I think, but it fits different ways of thinking. So everybody can be free to express themselves in Ruby. So and how I see in a way talking about new features, how I see the evolution from the perspective of someone that just consumes. I see, like, for example, just asking how can you calculate the sum of all elements of an array of integers. So maybe years ago, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago or so, maybe we could have written assembly language. I did not draw this, I searched for it on the internet. I even asked ChatGPT to explain it to me. It seems okay, reading those things there. But the idea that when I look at this code, it's of course low level, and it's easy to read in some kind of ways, but I don't think in these keywords in my head. I have to make a translation when I think about a business domain and I would like to calculate the sum of all elements. I have to do a translation between how I think about that and this one. I'm not saying this is bad. I think we need sometimes to write maybe this type of code. And then maybe we got to the C kind of languages. I'm not going to do a history, but just saying, right? Which seems a bit better and even compact in some way. But still you have to take a lot of decisions thinking that the objective is to calculate the sum. So I have to think about an iterator and where does it start and when does it end and so on and so forth. So then Matz think about a concept to compress all of this called each, and wrote the C part of this one so that we can write this type of code where I don't think where it starts and where it ends and how to name an iterator and what is the increment. I just think that I want to make a sum. And more so, Ruby offers a better compression of complexity, if I can say, making it a dot sum. Okay, and with this, and this is an important piece that I want to put there about trying new features, it's like learning new concepts on new words in a dictionary. It allows you, if you know them, to be able to address bigger problems and describe them more. So having a sum, or having the concept of a map, I can just write map there and then move over to a more complex algorithm that I want to tackle and not write the part there. But I'm not going through all this evolution. My purpose is mostly to say that I think for me, Ruby, what does it bring with having a wide area of what the language offers? It offers me what I would like to call a compression of complexity into some kind of abstractions, if you want. But let's call them maybe some new words or concepts that we can use so that we can write concise code that is still readable. And that for me goes a bit near simplicity or making things simpler. And so, just to summarize, one of the ways that I think we should learn new features is that as in language, people are saying that words shape our thinking and our reality. The same way the features of a programming language and how a programming language is can shape the way we think and how we think about the problem, how we are defining it, and how the code we write. And now, in the same time, Ruby, it's a mature programming language. I don't know if you noticed that, but it's not new. And that's a good thing, right? But it might have a dilemma. And in general, mature programming languages have a dilemma. As they mature, it changes. They need to change to stay relevant and address new problems and improve usability. But then they have to tackle the idea to introduce new features and paradigms, whatever, can disrupt the code base and ecosystem. And I paraphrased The Innovator's Dilemma, which is a famous book in startup world, saying that we might have a programming language dilemma, and that is long-time users of the language may prefer stability and backward compatibility, while newer users, or the ones that are using the language at the edge or pushing where it is used, may advocate for more radical changes and to keep the language modern and efficient for them, right? So it's a dilemma. And I think here, if I look at the Ruby community, I could say that probably most of us are senior or at least medium as a general feeling of the community, probably. I did not do a study, but that's my feeling, right? So we might go into a kind of expert, not dilemma, but trick that is a benefit of being an expert. That the more you use something, in our case, this programming language, the current set of capabilities, the better our brain fits them and thinks in them, right? And we might become a bit conservative toward what's new. And that's not a big problem, but there is a risk there. And for example, it's probably fine to be skeptical about what's new sometimes and say, I will stay a bit behind and see if it works, what is added. But the risk here is when this attitude goes to, I'm not even going to try it. Right? So I ignore it completely. Or it is okay to use what you know and say, okay, I will not learn this new thing that was added now. Let's see. But the risk here is that because we stick with what we know, we are trying to change problems to fit the solutions that we know. Right? We change the problem to fit the solution. And so in a way, it's like we have a lot of discussions about these methods, And it's most like I thought about it and it feels like I almost used them, but did not actually use them in the code. So, and talking about the community part, because that was also a thing of myself, is that when we are focusing on being conservative, let's say, it feels stiff or rigid or inelastic, and that goes to a closed community in some way, having high expectations for someone that is new. So I call this a risk in a way, and this risk comes out of our love for Ruby in a way that because we want to protect it that much, right? We want to protect it, we don't see that we are actually shielding it from the future. And that might be a risk. I'm not saying this is happening, I'm saying it might be a risk. So, but there is a solution to this, and this is why I'm here to pitch you that we have to be open to new. And that means to experiment with these new features. I'm not saying adopt them all from tomorrow, but try to experiment with them, choose what works for you, and be open a bit to break and rebuild for this. And this is a path to stay relevant. So coming back to my idea, my pitch is simple, just adopt new features, try to experiment with them for real in your code base and see what works, and provide feedback to core committers and to Matz about your use case and how it works and what not. All right, so at the beginning, for me, Ruby felt strange, and even Linus Torvalds said about us when talking about the success of Git, like he said, like the Ruby people, strange people started using Git and suddenly it just exploded. So my idea here today is like, I feel we can do this again because I feel Ruby inspired some other languages before when it was fresh and challenging, and I think we can do it again, this feeling. So let me talk about the endless method then, showing some code because that was an introductory speech. So endless method was introduced in Ruby in 3.0 in 2020. It started as an April Fool joke, but now it's actually in the language. And it looks like this. It's a def, and then the name of the method, and can be some parameters, an equal, and something. And sometimes people say, it's very strange for me to read this. But for me, if I read it, I read it like this. Define exist as equal to the active record expression. I'm just saying for me. I'm not saying for you should read it like this, right? But we had this one line or one expressions before, right? You can write this is valid Ruby code still. This one and the other ones. So it's not quite strange to have everything in one expression. And I'm using one expression and not one line, and I will show you some examples about this, right? So my assertion is the following. If I blur a bit out these ones, and let me blur them more, do you feel that it's a bit confusing that the first definition, it stops at the end of the line, and then it comes a new definition? Maybe you feel a bit strange about this one, right? It feels like something stops there and something starts. So for me, the endless method just adds a clarity to all of these things, right? It puts an equal there, separating the definition of the body. So let me show some examples. This one from Mastodon is not actually from your source code, but it's a change that I was thinking can be good. I did not submit the PR because I don't want the maintainers to just read a small change, but I was browsing and reading some open source code to get some inspiration about how other people are writing code, and saw this kind of thing there. You see, like, and I found it nice, you know, it's like declaring a name in the domain that they are programming there instead of working with numbers. And I was thinking, you know what, this is a great fit for the endless method here. And if I do it like this, then I can group them in a very nice way like this. And so I can read them very quick in some way, and I can even group them visually, right? And so, going a bit in why to use it. So the first thing is that you can write small utility methods and it does not increase the line numbers at all. Then you can even use the idea that it's hard to make it long as a point to not make methods complex. So for example, this is a piece of code that takes the status ID, and I can write it like this specifically to make it hard to add more things to it. You have to change it into a normal method and then multi-line. So this works, these constraints can work in before adding more things here, to think, do I really need to add them here? Do I really want to transform this into a normal method? Right? So using this against the change, not against being open to change, but thinking more about the change. And of course, because it does not add more lines of code, we can use it for naming. And I think this is one of the best cases. So let's say we have in code these kind of things, user settings and some team settings and some default settings. And what I can do is just, I can transform this one into endless methods with better names that are searchable, right? Like this. And then I can compose them into a nicer method that says, user settings, its personal preferences, or default user preferences. And team settings, it's team preferences or default team preferences. So it goes well with naming. It also goes well with defining some predicates, so you don't work with negative logic. If you want to, just renaming them, you don't have to. And it also works well with data object that we'll discuss later, that it keeps the object small, defining again some predicates there. And of course, it might have some gotchas. Like for example, you cannot use it directly, or at least when I did this benchmark, to define a setter method. You see the URL, it has an equal there, it's a setter, right? So maybe that was by design or not, but the idea, this is my idea, to use it. And if you find yourself that you really want to use it a lot like this, then you can submit a proposal to make it work. But you have to show a more normal case and not a theoretical one. I would like this to work because I think it should work, right? But when you show application code and a case for it, it makes it easy also for Ruby committers to decide, should I put the effort into making this thing? Anyhow, talking a bit about changing code shape, you remember that I said it's one expression and not one line. Here is an endless method, multi-line. That works. This is valid code. And it feels to me like a bit like it's a, I'm not going to say Elixir with guard clauses, but it's like I was putting a kind of guard clause directly in the same line with the definition here. And I know what you're thinking. I just took a screenshot from there. What if my Rubocop will be over the air if I write over the air, if I write this kind of code? Yes, but I'm just saying play with it for fun, or disable that, maybe starting in your personal projects to play with it and see how it works. Because I can push it further and put a case there like this, or I can align it like this, and it almost feels like it has an end, but don't get tricked, it misses an end there to be a real method. Right? And of course, you can play in many more ways, and these are just some examples with it. So it might change a bit the way the code looks like. Maybe for some of you in a good ways, maybe for some of you, you don't find it good, but they work. And a benefit of the endless method, a side effect of it, it's greppable. In the sense that, for example, if I grep by the name of a method, I get the line. But if I grep an endless method, I get the body of the method where it was found. And I think that could explore, as Casper was reading some code bases, right? You grep about something and you can see them. Now, another favorite of mine, it's data class. And I really think this should not be that unfamiliar, or it should be used more. And probably it is used more, but I did not find too many places. So data class was introduced in 2022. And what is a data object, or a data value object, if you want? A convenient way to define a simple classes for value-alike objects, and they have a property. It's immutable, it has a simple interface, can be comparable by value and by type. And here's the interface of this class. It's very simple. And I totally love that. This is an object that is a very simple object. And talking about it, it goes like this. You use data define, you give it the attributes that you want, and you can instantiate it in a lot of forms. For example, with required keyword arguments, or with positional arguments, or with this form that I couldn't find the official name for it. I call it an alternative form construct, or someone said that, with square, or even with squares and keyword-like arguments. I don't know the proper name, but in the break, if you know, tell me so that I change this. And it has no setters. I said it's immutable, so you cannot change the attributes that you give it at the initializing of it. And that's a benefit, this one. You cannot change some custom instance variable that you are trying to define inside it, so not the one initializers. You cannot change them. And that, again, it's a good property of this one. And it's frozen by default. So you just create it, and it's there, cannot be changed, with an asterisk, but we don't go into that. The asterisk, sorry, you know it from others because you can trick it giving a hash as initializer and changing the hash itself if you don't put effort to make it frozen. So you don't reassign the instance variable, you just change the object that is there. But that is not specific to data product, and sometimes that makes for a cool trick. But okay, a cool, nice trick to it. Why use it? So the first thing is that you want to keep data together and give it a name. And again, I think that's the main case for it in some ways, as I see it. So for example, if you are writing a client for an external API and you read a response, you can pack it in a response data object, or I don't know, some interval together, day, start time, and so on. But going on with the response, because I think maybe everybody at some point will write a kind of client for an external service in some ways or others, right? You can write it like this. And you might ask yourself already, why not use a hash for that? Okay, first question is the hash is not immutable in this case, but maybe you can make it, right? But a better response for this is that the data object has a naming, so you can search for it. You can say, now I want to add rate limiting headers inside it, and where it is used, and you can grep for it, or in your editor you can search and find the definition and changes there, while the hash you have to write for it and then think, is this really the format that I wanted before, or I use it in a different place here? And you can, of course, add virtual attributes if you want, or computed attributes, or small behavior on it that you cannot do on the hash. Or you can compose it again with good naming, right? I want to add rate limiting, but I add a rate limiting that is also a data object. So I make sure that when I pass this response between multiple objects, nothing will change it. I can read it, I can do something with it, but it will not be changed. So it allows composition, and a cool thing, if you are writing this kind of code before, you can replace it with one line. If you don't need not mutable, right? Or you can inherit from it if you want. You can and this is a real code. I was reading the open source, the Odin project, and here is a code using Rails. So they define a list of reasons with some attributes. They create data object out of those. They send it to, They send it to the enum, and then they use that constant in views. So now everything is the same. If you want to access some attributes in the code base, it has the same kind of thing. Another one, hash value omission. I'm going very quickly through them, but I want to write to pattern matching very quickly. So hash value omission. What is this? This is one introduced in 2021. And it goes like this. What I like about this a lot is that if you want to use it, you have to have the same names. It forces you to be consistent. So here is a piece of code. Maybe someone wrote at the top of a file or somewhere website and from, and then in some other part, it wants to do URL and source. And these are different names for the same thing. So first I want to make them the same, like this, right? And then the question is, do I really need to provide the source and URL here so that this hash is created, and I can take them out, and Ruby will create the hash for me. And Ruby search is in the local context, local variables or local context of the object, either method names or local variables, let's say. I can go further and combine the data object with this one here. And so again, having different names, I will have, for example, someone wrote something like this all over the place with what is a URL or address and so on. I make them the same first. Now the code already looks nice, just forcing me to do that, although this in my case. And then I take out these values, and you can also see here that this value omission works also for keyword arguments. And it's important to remember this thing that the value disappears, because we will use not the same thing, but the same idea in the pattern matching in some ways. So I remove these ones, and now this code for me flows very nicely, some data at the top, and that flows to the other lines, or this is how I see it in my mind. So why use it? Very simple, because it simplifies naming and reduce repetition and focus what matters. As a side effect, if you want to use one of the reserved keywords, and you might have written like this, you cannot just write class there as a variable name. You might have written this. The author of the proposal, maybe Shugo Maeda, I'm not sure if I pronounce it well, proposed that you can actually use this construct to do that. And I did a benchmark. He also did a benchmark. And it's actually almost 3 times faster than using the binding. I'm not sure why, but it's just faster. And we go to pattern matching, which I think has the most chances to change the way the shape of our code, let's say, how the code looks like. So let's say I'm listening to a stream of data that comes as a hash from an API or somewhere, and I want to just process the one that has type push. So I use a data object and create a class named push notification, and then I can use this form of pattern matching and say if notification has this kind of shape that it has a type key named push and then some title and body and push time, I can instantiate an object from it. And you might ask, wait a second, from where the title and body and push time are coming from, because I did not define them. And you can inspect yourself in Ruby to see what happens. You can say, I want to print the local variables here. And if you do that, you see that here the notification exists. And here, there are 3 new variables in your context here, created by pattern matching. And this comes with a bit of warning. Pattern matching will create local variables, but if they exist, it will change their values. But we have a solution, and that is called pinning. I don't know the name of this character, but carrot. Yes, you use that for that. Now, I want to talk about another form. So one way to build this is the following, in. There is another form of pattern matching that is called rightward operator. And it looks like the line 7 here. I say notification, does it look like what's on the right? And of course, if it looks like, I want to put in title, the value of title, and in body, the value of body, and push time, and so on and so forth. Now, this one adds a benefit, if you want to, that if it does not match, it throws an exception. So you can do something on that part of it. Or you can say, I really don't want to do anything if you don't match, not move forward. And let's say a request comes to you and says, you know what, I want you to support more types that are coming, like email or a messaging thing. So I look at them and I notice they have different attributes, not the same attributes as the one before. So I create new classes for this. So then I can use the third form of pattern matching, that is case in. It seems like case statement, but it's case in. And it goes like this. I want to say, if what comes, the hash is type push, then I want the title, the body, and push time. If type is email, I want the subject, the sender, recipient, email sent it. And if it's message, SMS, I want the message, the phone number, and sent it. This does not throw an exception. I can go to else there. Sorry. So why we use pattern matching? Because first, it opens the possibilities of what we can do with it. I feel for me that it opens the possibility to write code in some very different ways. It almost feels like this is a new strange domain of how can I write code with it. Okay? So some examples. You can check the type of a variable, but please remember Ruby is a dynamically typed language. If you do that, you renounce the duck typing. And also I feel obliged to put here a quote from Xavier that it's also constant all the way down in some ways. But how you can do that? Let's say for some whatever reason you have to write this type of code where it matters the type of the parameter. Okay? You can replace that line with this one that almost feels like a type kind of declaration if you look at it at the beginning of the method, let's say, if you put it there. Of course, this throws an exception, so I can do something with it. I can replace it with the in one. Do you remember there was an in one that throws true and false, if I want to? But this in offers more things, not only true and false. So I can say, I want to pass a hash, but I'm only concerned if that hash has a key called hashtag of type array. If not, don't do anything. Okay? So I'm concerned about does it have a key? And I don't want to say if key exists and so on and so forth. This is a simple form to do that, and then I can throw this call and it works, and I can throw these other calls and they don't work. But the code is simple there. And of course, you can replace it with a case in if you have to behave differently based on the class of the argument. Okay? You can use it for error handling and validation. So you might say, I want to validate that the data has a name that is a string and an age that is an integer. And you can use it for that. Sorry. You can use it to destruct a more complex structure. So here I'm looking at the input and I say the input has a key named height that is of type of integer, and in that case put it in the variable named height. You don't have to reuse the same name of the variables if you don't want to. You can rename them with this construct. And then I create an object with it. I cannot go into all the details, but I'm just trying to throw different code of you, okay? Then you can destruct more complex data, as I said, in different ways. This is another example. But what I'm going to do here, I'm going to combine this one with endless method. So you can also write it like this one. And now let me show you at the end the kind of more complex and maybe more real example. Let's say you're an active record in Rails and you have an organization and users and admins, and they might have roles and permissions, and you can say the following. If you create this deconstruct keys method, you say, as a user object, when you're called into pattern matching, show yourself like this. Like you see here, name, username, organization, and so on. When you're called into one of those three forms, show yourself like this. And then I say to the admin, you know what? The admin also has permissions. Add permissions there and role. And then what I can do, let's say I want to show welcome message that is different in a Rails helper, that is different based on not only if it's an admin or user, but based on what other roles it has. So, for example, if it's an admin and it has the role owner, I want the organization name and age and so on, and I show message. If it does not have a role owner, but it has permissions, then I show something else. If it's a user object, and with a role member do something, and if it is a user object with a role team lead, do something else. And of course, you can achieve this without pattern matching, but I find it nice to look at this and make sure and see what happens there. So you heard this, and what now? Well, these are only 4 of the things that I choose from many features that Ruby has released at least since Ruby 2.7, and you will find a lot more of them, and you heard some of them. But I'm happy to see that slowly it's starting to go also reading some open source code. Like, for example, this is a pull request, and you see here down an example with pattern matching in the documentation that maybe will go into the documentation of Rails. So it's not only something strange that someone is using somewhere, it might go more mainstream, if I want to use this word, I don't know, right? Something like this. But what I think you should do to discover and play with it, first, disable Rubocop or standard RB for yourself, not in your teams, okay? For yourself. I don't want to say those tools are bad because I think they're very useful. I'm saying playing with these features. Or anyhow, Rubocop, you can make it work with these features because every rule has off, on, and so on, so you don't have to disable it completely. Okay, I'm just saying. But go to rubylang org news, choose one of the years, read the beautiful announcements there, choose a feature and start playing with it. Try to use it in your project. Or if you prefer someone did the summary for you, Victor Shepelev, that you saw yesterday, I think, or one of these days, 2 days ago, sorry. Yes, he maintains these Ruby references where he is doing a summary of the biggest highlights, and he provides more code examples of those ones, if you want a kickstart. And of course, I invite you to subscribe to my newsletter, where I try to show a lot of types of codes, because my newsletter, it's a Monday morning summary of articles, discussions, and news from the Ruby community. If you want to subscribe, there. And just a funny joke that I invite you, if you want to find out, just read the release notes of Ruby 3.40 preview. At Christmas, it is coming. Just a puzzle for you. Thank you very much.